What we've accomplished over the last 2.5 years could not have been done without the extraordinary leadership of the Secretary of HUD, Shaun Donovan. Shaun, come on up and sound off.
So let's get a joined at the hip picture.
Yeah, okay.
Here we are.
Joined at the hip.
Joined at the hip, right here. See?
Good luck. Thank you. Take care.
You see that? Joined at the hip, right there. As Ray leaves, and I hope he can hear as he heads back, it has been so much damn fun working with Ray LaHood and the team at DOT. And I will tell you that, and you all know this, I came from local government. We can make a world of difference if we just put aside the old divisions and turf battles and make these partnerships work. And so much of that is dependent on leadership. And Ray's right, I did reach out and came over here to have lunch. I think it was a little better than the box lunch that you're having, maybe. But he immediately not just said, yes, I want to do this. He has become, and I think you will all agree with this, he has become a sustainability rock star over the last few years. We went, and I knew this when we went out on the road together, because we came back and the team had made up these black, like roadie t-shirts for the tour, right? So he was officially a rock star of sustainability, and it has been so much fun. And I just want to say thank you to Ray. Thank you for the partnership. Thank you for the vision and the leadership that he's provided. And I particularly also want to say thank you to the entire team from DOT and HUD and EPA. Lisa's not here today, but they have been just fantastic from the beginning. Let's give them all a round of applause. And could I ask all the HUD and DOT folks to stand up? Come on, Rick. And I also just have to say a special thank you to Shelley Peticha, who is the Energizer Bunny of sustainability. You know, part of what we needed to do, and that's why we're all here celebrating with you today, we needed to get out in the world, and we needed to connect to so many of the things that were already happening on the ground. And I can't think of anybody better to have jumped in to lead these efforts, and I am so proud of the work that Shelley's done over these last 2.5 years. Let's give her a round of applause. Thank you, Shelley. So a year. We're here today celebrating a year since our first awards under this Partnership for Sustainable Communities. And what a year it's been. And I've talked about how much fun I've had doing this, what a great partnership it's been. But the other thing that has made this one of the things that I am very proudest of in my time as HUD Secretary is that we have really started to change the world. It is amazing to see the progress that we've made in just 1 year. And the truth is, for as much as we've done here at the federal level, the silos that we've started to break down, the way we've started to change the paradigm, you are the leaders. You are the ones that have showed us the way. And a lot of what we've done is just to get on your train, to get on your bus, and follow that, and follow your lead. And so what I want to say is, first and foremost, thank you. Thank you for your partnership. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for the remarkable work that you've done, not just over this past year, but over the decades leading up to this, to really lay the groundwork for what we have accomplished over the last year. We never would have gotten as much done, and we've exceeded all my expectations of what we could get done over this last year. We never would have done it without the enormous foundation that you have all laid in your communities with the remarkable innovation that you've done. So give yourselves a round of applause, and thank you for your partnership. Now, one of the reasons that this work has such urgency is that this really is, and this is a theme that I think I want to come back to a number of times today. Fundamentally, this work that we're doing is about improving our environment. It's about making real change on the community level to make better places for people to live. But this is also about economic development. It's about a strategy for getting people to work, to making the most of every dollar we have, to make sure that 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2, 1 + 1 equals 3, not just in terms of dollars, but in terms of jobs as well. And look, when you're the president and you walk into office, and the month you take over 800,000 jobs are lost, where housing prices have been dropping for 30 straight months, there is real urgency there. We have got to get people back to work. And this is why Ray and I and Lisa have been so focused on this. This is why the White House has been so focused. All of the other partners that we've started to bring on board is because fundamentally what you're doing in your communities is creating economic development, an environment that is going to create more jobs. But we also have to recognize that even if we'd had a different time when we came into office, we had a much longer term trend that was happening in America that was eroding our economic competitiveness. And that, as you all know, is the drive to qualify frenzy that we'd had and that was driving our housing market, not just in the few years leading up to the crash of the housing bubble, but over decades. We'd seen a set of policies that had driven development out to the fringes of our urban areas, and fundamentally disconnected families from jobs and communities. And so in my mind, and this is one of the points I've tried to make consistently, it is no accident that the communities that were hardest hit by this economic crisis were the least sustainable. The places where homes were farthest from transportation, places on the very fringes of our metropolitan areas where not only was driving the only option that you had, but when you were driving, you could spend an hour or more getting to work, hours that you should be home with your kids or doing other things, but also disconnected from schools, disconnected from places to shop, and disconnected often from a sense of community that is so important. And that's sort of one end of the spectrum, but we also saw urban neighborhoods that had been left behind as well, that were disconnected from opportunity, maybe in somewhat different ways, but in fundamental ways that you've been able to start to overcome, to restitch those neighborhoods into the urban fabric by connecting them better with transportation and opportunity, better schools, and ultimately to jobs, to economic opportunity. So we knew that this work that we were taking on, yes, it was about the immediate economic crisis, but it was also about a longer-term crisis, a more quiet crisis perhaps, but an equally profound one that started going way back probably to the 50s and 60s with urban policies around transportation, the freeway system, our housing policies that drove development away from urban centers, All of those are key parts of what we are trying to do, and recognizing the rural dynamics here too. That this was true, that sustainability affected every single community in different ways, but every single community across the country. And yet, if we were going to start to attack these problems, as we sat down with the president, with Ray, with Lisa in those early weeks of the administration, and even before that in the transition and the policy work that we're doing, what we realized was a fundamental thing, that the old approaches to these problems weren't going to work. And what do I mean by that? Whether you think about urban renewal, whether you think about our public housing policies, our old transportation policies, if we just went back to, we're going to sit here in Washington, design what a metropolitan or a rural community should look like, and then put out money, put out direction to you to say, here's what it should look like, we were going to fail. This had to be fundamentally different, where we were following your lead, where this was about how do we create tools that are about funding your vision for your communities. What do you want your community to look like? And how can we plug into that? How can we create opportunities for planning and other funding that meets your vision of what the community should look like? And so that's really how the Partnership for Sustainable Communities began. Is we sat down and we said, look, what are the principles that we want to follow here? Not the design guidelines, not the sort of box you all had to fit into. What are the key principles we're trying to achieve? To be clear about that, and then let you come and tell us, how are we going to achieve those principles? How are we going to achieve those directions in very different ways in different communities across the country, from coast to coast, from rural to urban, and everything in between. Yet, fundamental to that was these principles that said, in a world where American families spend 52 cents of every dollar they earn on just housing and transportation combined, you need a federal partner that's going to be vocal, that's going to be active, and then it's going to stand side by side with you. It's your vision, but you also need our leadership at the same time. You needed somebody that could help you and coordinate so that when you're ready as regions, as communities, to start acting not just as places that share problems, but that can actually share solutions, you have a federal partner that's ready to do the same thing. To break down the walls between the agencies, to join together, and to attack these problems in a coordinated way where, as I said earlier, 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2, 1 + 1 can equal 3. Now, as I said earlier, I was excited about this. Ray and I were working together. But I will tell you, I never expected that the work that we were doing would strike a chord, would provoke the kind of overwhelming response that we had. And you all should know this. Sitting here today, you are the best of the best around this country doing this work, because we got 10 times more applications than we could possibly fund. It was amazing to see the interest that we saw around the country for this first round of local challenge grants and the regional grants that we did. And not only was it inspiring us to see how broad the interest was, but it was also inspiring to see how each of you adopted these strategies in very specific ways that were really true to your local region. In Boston, and I've spent enough time in Boston to know, New England has this long-standing, long-held tradition of home rule. They don't call themselves counties. They do things their own way. But what we got was an application from the Boston region that really reflected those traditions. And it's working because it's working within those local and regional traditions. A very different kind of strategy that we saw from Charlottesville, Roanoke, and Blacksburg, Virginia, that reflected local traditions and what the economy looked like there. And in fact, given the politics of doing it there, they had a strategy that engaged opponents of regional planning in a way that really began to change the game on the ground. That's not something we could have told them. It's not something we would have said, hey, this is the right political. This is something that had to come from the ground. And I could tell that same story for every one of you in this room, of the way that what you proposed was authentic to local conditions and yet also true to these sustainability principles that we had laid out in the partnership between us and DOT and EPA. Now, one of the things that I think is important as we sit here a year later is to begin to draw some lessons from what we've seen. And I want to touch on, I think, 4 things that we've seen, maybe themes that cut across with all the diversity of what we've seen, and we love that diversity in what you're working on around the country. There are a number of themes that are emerging that I think characterize the work that we've been doing in partnership with you. And I want to touch on those 4 today. The first is that engaging the private sector has been absolutely central both to the success of the work that you're doing on the ground, but also the political potency of the work that you're doing. And I can't stress this enough. In a moment when so much of the work that we're doing, the investments that we're making at the federal level are at risk because of the fiscal challenges that we have, it's critical that we have everybody at the table, including the private sector, not just so that this actually works on the ground and we get leverage, but also that we have a broad and strong constituency for the work that we're doing that can stand shoulder to shoulder with us when we go fight for resources, as we're going to need to do literally in the next few weeks, to make sure that we can continue to invest in the planning and other work that you're doing. But this aspect of leveraging the private sector's power and the private sector's capital has been incredibly important and a theme among so many of the things that you've done. And that's true on the sustainable housing work that we've done. If you look at what we've been able to do in partnership with DOE, the Department of Energy, on the Recovery Act, by creating competitive programs, by urging and incentivizing leverage from the private sector, we're having a much deeper and broader impact in terms of the number of homes that we could retrofit. 750,000 homes we've been able to retrofit together with the Department of Energy through our resources in the Recovery Act. A remarkable achievement and something we never would have even gotten close to if it had just been government dollars alone. And that sort of race to the top aspect of the competitive dollars has been very important on that front. If we also look, though, at what a number of you are doing, and just to take a couple of examples, the Sacramento Council of Governments has been able to develop advanced data tools, working closely with the business community, that can both leverage many more jobs, but also demonstrate clearly the impact of this work that we're doing. This is one of the toughest challenges we have. We could talk about economic development, but too often, planning work, it's hard to say, well, exactly how many jobs will this create? What is the economic benefit? And so all of you, I would urge you, as Sacramento's doing, work with your private sector partners, quantify, make it concrete. What is the impact that this work is having on job creation and ultimately on revenues to government through all of the economic activity that's created. We can show, for example, in Austin, that this work pays for itself because for every dollar we invest, we get back more than $1 in increased business activity and new revenues that come back to government as a result of that. In Flint, Michigan, the city's economic development team is partnering with local businesses to get expertise and input on remaking zoning codes. And this was very true in my experience in New York. We knew that we weren't going to create the right inclusionary zoning programs that would both win the support of the development community, but also get actual results unless the economics worked. And how did we do that? By sitting down side by side with banks and developers and figuring out how to get the math right, how to get the economics right on our zoning code. It's those kind of partnerships that are going to make sure that the planning that you're doing, the work that you're doing, is going to be a success in the end. So that's absolutely critical. So this private sector partnership, in a number of the ways that I've talked about, is absolutely central to the work, and I want to urge you to continue bringing to the table the chambers of commerce, all of the business partners in your communities that you've already reached out to. Strengthening those bonds is going to be incredibly important in the success of this effort going forward. The second thing that I think has been a real theme and critically important is making the very concrete and direct connections between the location of our housing and the location of transportation. And, you know, this was clear in our principles as we laid them out at the beginning. We said, you know, we're not going to be competitive as a country. We're not going to win the future, as the president likes to say, in our race with China and India and Brazil and all those other countries whose economic power is growing. We're not going to compete when it costs businesses 5 times as much wasted fuel and time moving products on our roads as it did just 25 years ago. And where getting employees to work is more expensive, more time. I have 2 young sons, 12 and 9. You can bet I don't want to spend an hour in my car getting home at the end of the day. I'd rather be home, spending time with them, being the dad that I want to be. That's critical to families, and it's critical to employers. As capital has become more and more mobile, as jobs can move everywhere, more and more we're competing for economic development based on quality of life, shorter commutes, less costly commutes, less cost of moving goods and services. All of that is incredibly important to our economic development strategy. And that's why in Denver, to take an example, local partners are working to connect thousands of residents to the economic heart of the region by aligning affordable housing development and all housing development along with commercial development along the new West Corridor rail line. Perfect example. So many of you are doing this transit-oriented development work that's so critical. We're doing our part by developing a transportation affordability index. One of the things I believe very fundamentally is one of the problems that led to our drive to qualify culture was that when you went to qualify for a house, they didn't even look at what your transportation costs are, right? And so what did that mean? Well, can't afford a house here, drive another half an hour out, you could maybe afford a house there, or maybe another hour out. But the fact is, that's not less expensive for the family all in. So we have to get better at connecting housing costs to transportation costs. And if we do, I believe it could be very powerful to drive mortgage capital and other private capital, development capital, into communities that are more sustainable, where the combined housing and transportation costs are lower, not just the housing costs alone. So that's incredibly important. A third theme that we've seen, and one I really want to continue to encourage you on, is that this can't be just about better connecting certain people in your communities to jobs. This has to be about better connecting everybody in your communities to jobs. And this is key for our economic development as a country. This is key to winning the future as well. Think about the fact that more than 20% of our kids now grow up in poverty. And the cost, not to them, the cost to all of us, the cost to America of those kids growing up in poverty is $500 billion a year in lost wages, lost productivity, medical costs. I could go on and on. $500 billion a year, 4% of GDP that we're losing because those kids are growing up in poverty. And guess what? If we can't help those kids become successful workers to reach their full potential, we're never going to be successful in the economic competition we're waging right now around this world. And so I'm very proud that you all have taken up this mantle, that we've got to make sure that this work benefits particularly neighborhoods of concentrated poverty, that opportunity, transportation, all the work that you're doing is available in the places where it's needed most, where there's least economic opportunity. I'm thinking about New Orleans, where we've combined a HUD Challenge Grant with a DOT Tiger II planning grant that's bringing together just a remarkable plan for the Claiborne Corridor. This is a neighborhood. This was the most successful, the first successful African-American community in New Orleans. And at the height of its success, it was split in two by a highway overpass that devastated the economic heart of that community. Today, we're actually studying bringing down that freeway, but doing a lot more than that. Billions of dollars investment in 2 hospitals in that area, connecting folks in that community to jobs at those hospitals. Reestablishing the old streetcar named Desire. DOT is funding that to bring back a streetcar that's going to connect families to those hospitals. Bringing arts funding, because there are some great old theaters that shut down decades ago, just blocks from the heart of this community. You may have heard of it, called Treme on the HBO series. All of these are being brought together with, guided by the planning that's been done under our Challenge Grant and the Tiger II Planning Grant. And this is one of the things I want to emphasize. You can bet that when you're doing your work planning, other resources are going to follow to make sure that you can implement those visions. And so just recently, we awarded our first 5 Choice Neighborhoods implementation grants. Each of these grants was about $30 million. And the idea here was a comprehensive rebuilding of the most troubled public and assisted housing in the country. Guess who won? Iberville Public Housing, right in the middle of that Treme neighborhood. And it scored so well because it was part of this comprehensive vision that had been funded by the Challenge Grant and the Tiger II Grant just a few months before. So that's a great example of how a strategy to attack and make sure we're using this to connect the most vulnerable residents of your community, whether it's through inclusionary zoning that makes sure new housing is going to be open to everyone, or that we don't gentrify and push out existing affordable housing in communities, or it's attacking the neighborhoods of concentrated poverty and helping bring opportunity there. That's been a remarkably consistent theme that we've seen, and one we want to continue encouraging in our work ahead. Finally, to move from the neighborhood level to the broader level, the consistent focus that you've all had on the region, needing to move beyond your traditional political jurisdictions, the old fights that we've had, city, suburb, fights that have hobbled so many of these efforts in the past. It's remarkable to see the work that's been done at a metropolitan focus and in rural areas on a regional basis as well. From Austin, Texas, to Greenville, South Carolina, from Chicago to Kansas City, to rural communities in Appalachia, to partnership in the Thunder Valley between Native American tribes. The work has been really remarkable and has really begun to shift to a new paradigm of cooperation across jurisdictional lines, something that we wanted to encourage, but again has exceeded our expectations. Now, I want to come back to a point I started to get to on choice neighborhoods, which is, you know, and you've certainly heard me crow a little bit about it here. We've done amazing work with a relatively small amount of planning dollars. $170 million between us and DOT. It's been remarkable, the movement that it's helped to support. But the truth is, if my budget at HUD is just $100 or $150 million for sustainability, we're going to lose. We're not going to be able to achieve the vision that we all have. But that's why I think the real sustainability budget at HUD is $40 billion. It's HUD's entire budget. And so to make that a reality, we've got to start changing the game for all the funding that we do, not just on the planning grants that you work so closely with us on. So what are we doing? We're integrating location efficiency into our programs by adopting the LEED ND Green Neighborhood Rating Standard in all of our competitive grants. Incredibly important step forward. We've also created, as you know, preferred sustainability status, which says, hey, if you've done the right kind of planning with our support or without it, you're going to have a leg up in competition for other HUD funds. And we're working closely with Lisa and Ray to make sure that this goes beyond HUD in the future, and we're very encouraged by the progress that we're making there. But you also need more than just expanded implementation resources, and particularly in certain communities, you also need help from us in a different way. And what I mean there is, you all, so many of you are at the forefront. You're at the cutting edge of this work. But I also hear from lots and lots of mayors, county commissioners, chambers of commerce, hey, this sustainability stuff is great. We want to get on board the bus or the train as well. How do we do it? We don't have the capacity, we don't have the skills, we don't have the table already set where everybody is working together like so many of you in this room have already been able to do. And so we've also started to work on building capacity, building the institutional capacity to make sure that this work can get started and that it can carry on beyond the end of this administration, beyond the 8 years that we certainly hope to have, that it continues for the decades that's going to be necessary to really transform communities. And so that's why, for example, we unveiled this summer the Strong Cities, Strong Communities pilot initiative to build capacity in 6 distressed cities and regions by offering on-the-ground technical assistance, by bringing foundations together to help bring top talent to be in local government, to be part of the public sector, to help build capacity there, to bring local businesses to the table, to help fund capacity building. All of that is part of a broader effort to say, there are a lot of places that have now got the interest. You all have done great work proselytizing about this around the country, getting folks excited. Now we need the capacity to actually do it, to implement it in many communities around the country, and we have to help build that capacity going forward. Now, of all these things that I've talked about, of the resources and other things, I want to pause and focus for a moment on one thing that is particularly urgent and that we need your help on. And that is, in the very near term, making sure that we have the resources to be able to do this work. I don't need to tell you that we're going to have challenges even to get $100 million into HUD's budget for our planning grants. This is a fight that we can win, and how do I know that? Because as I've traveled around the country, what I've seen is something remarkable. In blue states and red states, in distant suburbs and central cities, in Indian country, in the most rural parts of this country, folks get this. They understand that this isn't about HUD coming in and saying, here's what your community should look like. This is about communities coming together across geographic lines, across political lines, and saying, what do I want my community to look like? How do we build jobs? How do we build an economic future? I was in Salt Lake City recently, and here's one of the most Republican states at the state level, a great Democratic mayor. The whole Wasatch Front has come together with a single united vision about what the region should look like. And it's being driven in a bipartisan, multi-geographic way that is absolutely remarkable to see. And yet you sit here in Washington and you'd think that was impossible, right? That somehow the idea of what's happening in so many of your communities seems foreign. And so what we need you to do is to talk about what you're doing. To say, hey, wait a second. This isn't just some Obama administration initiative that you should just think of as, old federal style planning. This is a very different thing. This is about taking what's been learned on the ground. I saw this in the New York region. I was part of helping to bring this type of planning to the forefront. This is what we want to do in our communities. This is what we were starting to do anyway, but particularly with state and local budgets as tough as they are, it's not going to be able to continue unless we get some help. And if you're saying that, if your chambers of commerce are saying that, and we're saying it across party lines and geographic lines, we can win this fight. But the fight is right now. It's literally in the next few weeks. And we need to win that fight. We need to win it on the budget, but you know where else we need to win it? We need to win it on the American Jobs Act. Think about what $50 billion worth of investment in transportation would mean. Think about what the creation of an infrastructure bank would mean. And think about what $15 billion of investment in Project Rebuild would mean. Project Rebuild would allow us to take 150,000 residential and commercial properties that are sitting vacant, that have been foreclosed and abandoned, take those and turn them from eyesores in communities into assets. 200,000 jobs would be created in construction just from that Project Rebuild alone. And what's so exciting, we've seen like in places like in Atlanta, the sustainability grants that have gone to regional planning there have meant that when they've started to use this funding through our neighborhood stabilization effort, they've targeted it to communities where they're creating transportation-oriented development, where the communities that are closest to their transit lines are the places they're concentrating those funds to make sure that instead of those communities declining in density, they're actually being built up. And that obviously supports the work that we're all trying to do. So please, help us help you. Help us make the case for the budget that we need at transportation and EPA and HUD. Help us make the case for the American Jobs Act. Because for all the plans in the world, if we can't implement them, if we don't have the resources we need to make them a reality, then we're never going to get to the vision that you all have. Let me finish where I began, which is to say thank you. At a time, and we're here in Washington, when the country is increasingly losing hope that we can come together and do big things as a country, when they're increasingly losing hope that we can get beyond the old stale debates of big government versus small government, you are showing that the real question is, can we do smart government? Can we do government that works? Can we do government that says, hey, if I take this transportation investment and this housing investment and I put them together in the right way, I'm actually going to get more jobs, better places to live, families that have more money in their pocket because they're not spending 52 cents of every dollar they earn on housing and transportation combined, a stronger economy, stronger families, stronger neighborhoods and communities. That is what you all are demonstrating at a time when too much of this country is losing hope that we can do those kind of smart things and that we can make big changes and big progress in this country. I am so proud that we have begun to be the federal partner that you need. We celebrate today a year of a remarkable partnership, but we also have, as Ray said, a long road ahead of us. We've got much work to do. We're not going to stop now. We can't let the incredible progress that we made be turned back. We're at a critical moment. It's a perfect time for us to be here together celebrating, but also redoubling our efforts. Reaching down deep into what brings us to these tables, to this room today, and to recommit together that when we gather a year from now, we are going to be celebrating even greater achievements, even more than we've done in this past year, because we resolve today to not let anybody turn us back. Thank you for your partnership. Thank you for the work that you've done. It's been a remarkable year. We've got many more good ones ahead of us. Thank you.